International Christian Embassy Jerusalem is your embassy in the heart of Israel, founded in 1980. From our headquarters in Jerusalem through our branches in over 80 nations and yours in Canada, we seek to challenge the church to take up its scriptural responsibility, to remind Israel of the promises made to her in the Bible, and to be a source of practical assistance to all the people in the land of Israel. On today's program, a rabbi frankly discusses tough issues about women in the church. A panel discussion on the direction of Canada's support for Israel. A trip to Magdala to see the first century road and marketplace. Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus.
Rabbi, traditionally in the Christian church, men have been in leadership.
Correct.
There's a lot of controversy now in allowing women more leadership in the church. What is your view on that?
Well, my view used to be that women need to shut up. They weren't to talk in the church, and they weren't to have authority over men. Because I got that from the Bible. Prayer and fasting for a week. We actually had a woman that was a great singer, and we wanted to see if she, if the Bible would support a woman teaching the songs in our congregation. We're all Messianic. I had never read the New Testament except for once. And so I wanted to find out if God wanted women to teach.
Can you please tell us those scriptures that you refer to?
The two main scriptures that I couldn't get out of my mind is 1 Corinthians 14, verse 34, and following, and 1 Timothy 2, verse 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, where it says a woman is not to have authority to teach a man or have authority over men. So those were my two main scriptures. Me and all the men of our congregation that were the elders prayed and fasted for a week to find out if the wife of the worship leader could teach the songs in the congregation. We found out after a week of praying and fasting, no. Women were not to teach men. Women were not to speak. So I had these great scriptures, and I used to be a persecutor of women. And then God threw me a curveball. A curveball was my wife. Didn't know she'd be my wife because we had both planned to be celibate. God has a sense of humor. It says he sits in heaven and he laughs. And then I have a woman that breaks all my, I had great scriptures. I mean, from Eve in the garden and to the women in Revelation. I had great scriptures against women. And then my wife doesn't fit any of them. She's a prophet. I said, wow, something's wrong with these scriptures. Took 7 years of research, and this is my book, The Woman Factor, which will refute all the scriptures that are against women and actually give you some ammunition that we didn't have back then. It'll make you really happy to read this book.
For those, and we should be as Christians, be buried in scripture, but can you think right now off the top of some of the scriptures that might stand out for those who are saying, how can we refute this when it is in scripture?
Let me briefly tell you that the scriptures that we read in English were written either in Greek or Hebrew, and these scriptures were translated. And the translators were all men. Just happened to be. Let me read 1 Corinthians 14, verse 34. Paul is talking about order in the congregation, order in the churches, and he's trying to put order to those that there won't be so much teaching, preaching, and things that would not let anybody get out of the church. I mean, it would go 24 hours. So he says, let the two or three prophesy, and then he's setting order. And then he comes to a very interesting verse in 34. The women, which is gune, that's Greek for women, are to keep silent in the churches, for they're not permitted to speak. Speak is laleo in Greek. But are to be subject to, they're to be subject themselves, just as the law also says. If they desire to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it's improper for a woman to speak to laleo in the church. Okay? Now, I'll just take these couple of scriptures, these couple of words in Greek, and I'll show you something. Women is gune. Now, gune can mean any type of woman. This woman that they're talking about in Corinth were wives. But no translations that I saw say wives. They all say women. Why? That's a more encompassing word to include all women. The single, the married, divorced, women in general. So let's go on. They're not permitted to speak, laleo. Now, laleo does mean speak. But you have to know something about the Corinth women. They were not educated. These women were like, if you've ever been to Israel, have you been to Israel?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So have you been to an Arab congregation?
No,
Okay.
not in Israel.
Okay. The Arab congregations, the women are not allowed to do anything, and they usually are covered, and they're, as a matter of fact, still in the society today, most Arab women are not educated with, higher education, but they do know how to cook and do household chores. Now, this was the same with the Corinth women. The Corinth women were not educated and didn't know how to act in public. So this is what happened. When the preacher would say something, let's say like I'm saying, words that you're not familiar with, laleo and gune. Well, gune does mean to speak, but it also means to make a loud noise or to disturb. It could be just a disturbance. So what Paul's saying is, I know that the wives of your Corinthian men don't know how to act in public, okay? And we don't want them disturbing the service, like, hey, what's the price of green beans today? Stuff like that. Just in case, the preacher went over the head. So now Paul is saying, look, I want the wives to be in subject and not to make a disturbance. It's not for all women, because needless to say, are you married? Single?
Yes.
You're married. Okay. We have a single girl back there. Okay, and she wouldn't fit this. Okay, so single women don't fit this, but the whole general idea was just to set order in the church. Okay, the other scripture that now I've got many things in my book. You'll find out that Paul actually had a woman as his pastor, but let me get one more here for you in 1 Timothy 2 verse 8. I'm sorry, we'll start in 11. A woman, also gune, must quietly receive instruction with entire submission. But I do not allow a gune, a woman, to teach or exercise authority, authenteo, over a man, but to remain silent or quiet. Now, again, this is about a specific instance. If you went to Bible school, in Bible school, these are the pastoral letters. This is from Pastor Paul to Pastor Timothy, his disciple. And of course, they loved each other. They wanted to see everybody grow. But there was a particular woman, gune, in this area that there was a revival going on. And I'll tell you who she was. You go back to verse 8, it says, therefore I want men in every place to pray, lifting up, this is mankind, lifting up holy hands without wrath and without doubt. Likewise, I want women, gune, to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly garments, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for women, for gune, making a claim to godliness. All right, now, there was a particular woman in this area, and they were the prostitutes of Diana. Now, there was a big revival going on. They were getting saved. And how could you tell a prostitute? Did they have mini skirts and high heels? No. But they had pearls braided in their hair. So you know, oh, this girl's a prostitute. All right? They also were able to buy the expensive, jewelries and things, and have the expensive clothing, not like most of the women. So here they're all getting saved. And these, unlike the women of Corinth, these were worldly women. And these could get men to do what they wanted to do because they knew how to manipulate men. So Paul doesn't want to see the world coming into the church. He wants the church going into the world, affecting the world. So this is why he's saying, likewise, I want the prostitutes who are getting saved to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreet. It makes more sense now, right? Not with braided hair. See, not, take the things that you're showing that you're a prostitute and stop it. Braided hair or gold or pearls are costly garments, but rather by means of good works, as is proper for godly women, I'll just say that, godly women making a claim to godliness. And then it goes on. Wait. So how do we know this is these women? Because the word authenteo doesn't just mean having authority. Authenteo is when a woman uses her sexuality over a man to make him do what she wants him to do. That's how we know that that's how that fits.
I want to thank you for providing context, because I know that there are those who are watching that will say, well, look, we can contextualize everything and change it, but you're providing a logical, historic context here. And in addition, for those who may say women should not be preaching in the churches, well, in the churches, we also have women who are adorned. So if you look at that, you can tell right there what the context is. Now, before we close, there's one important statement that you made that I'd like you to give a very brief comment on. Okay. You mentioned about you used to persecute women. I don't want people to misread that statement. And the meaning that you had in mind is very, again, contextual. If you can just give us a few words to describe what you meant by persecuting women.
Well, being Jewish, I never heard any Christian doctrines, because I'm Jewish. I mean, never went to a church. And I felt that I needed to pick up where Paul left off. And all I had at that time was the English translation of the Bible. And I felt that Paul wanted to put women in their places. You know, being sort of a macho type of guy, I felt, well, that fits my personality, you know. So that's where that came about.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. You were a wealth of information, and we did have the privilege to meet your very dynamic, beautiful wife.
And she is.
Thank you again.
God bless you.
Isaiah chapter 62, verse 1. For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet, till her righteousness shines out like the dawn, her salvation like a blazing torch.
Susanna, what can we do as Christians now, knowing the history of the Holocaust? What can we do now, today?
Well, one of the most important things about Yad Vashem is what we say. We say remembering the past, shaping the future. So it's not good enough to learn about the past unless you put the lessons into action and you do something about it. One of the things that we have here since 2010 in the Yad Vashem campus are the seminars we do for Christian leaders from around the world. We invite Christian pastors, journalists, opinion leaders to come to Yad Vashem to participate in such a seminar, not just to study the Holocaust, but also anti-Semitism, which is a very important, sadly, a very existing force in today's world, and about Israel today. And then, of course, we also invite visitors, Christian groups, to come and contact us before they make their tour to Israel and come to Yad Vashem, not just to run through the museum quickly because it's like an obligatory stop, but to come and really understand why this place is so important and why this, I would say, a very Jewish place is trying to reach out to Christians today, calling them to be friends of Yad Vashem and really joining and becoming a friend of Yad Vashem, for example, through the ICEJ Canada.
And we have had Canadian pastors here, pastors and leaders who've been in these seminars and have been very moved by it. And I must say that when you do come here with your group, you must see the Christian Friends of Yad Vashem who will meet you, who will show you things that you may not even see on your own. And I've been here many, many times, the former museum and now this beautiful facility here. And I've seen something new more today. So just because you've been here once doesn't mean that you've seen all of it. I would encourage you to come back. Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you.
Up next, a panel discussion on Canada's direction in supporting Israel.
Hello and welcome to our panel discussion. We're discussing the UN, Canada, and Israel. There's an odd relationship between all three, and this is something that we're going to be addressing today. My guests, George Woodward, Bob Mayton, and Bill Smythe. Now, the first item on the agenda in the news recently, Stanley Michael Link, a professor of Western University in London. He was appointed as Special Rapporteur on Palestinian territories in the United Nations. Now that was a blow up in Canada because he's got a long history of blatant anti-Semitism where he has openly been a guest in speeches such as those which represent one state solutions. I mean, this guy's we're going to discuss more about what he has in his history. But that's one thing. Another one is Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Stéphane Dion announced $15 million to go to the UN. And when questioned, why would we do business with an organization that has become so viciously against Israel? And if you look at the members of the United Nations Security Council, Human Rights Council, it is a disgrace. You've got some of the world's worst violators on there. So the answer was, well, maybe Canada can have some positive influence on the United Nations. Thoughts?
Well, I think the Liberal Party in power right now has a real problem. On the one hand, I like the fact that they have dissociated themselves from Michael Link. Stéphane Dion has said that he was not their appointment. They would have made another appointment if they had the choice, and they are not going along with this appointment. Michael Link is anti-Semitic, there's no question. And I think that the Liberal Party is skating through a minefield because on the one hand, they want to ingratiate themselves with the UN because they want a seat on the Security Council and possibly get onto the Human Rights Commission as well, where Michael Link is the rapporteur to Palestine. So whether the Liberals, their intention, they say, is to influence the Human Rights Commission and the UN in the direction of Israel, but whether it works the other way is really an interesting question. What happened with the Conservatives in the past, when the Conservatives tried this tactic a few years ago, is that the UN sent people to investigate Canada's human rights record. And they found that there was lots of discrimination going on against women and against Native people, and that the rates of jail, for example, for various groups varied, and made a terrible report to the UN about Canada's human rights record. And so the Conservatives basically withdrew from it. I think the Liberals are going to run into the same problem.
Now, there's a lot of pressure that came from the Jewish groups as well against this Link's appointment, calling on the Liberal government to condemn the appointment, which they did. But also, Simon Wiesenthal also called on the federal government to withdraw its $15 million in funding, which it has not done.
I mean, to me, Michael Link is a perfect candidate for the UN Human Rights Commission. I mean, the record, they were formed 10 years ago because the previous organization, which was called the UN Council for Human Rights, had so disgraced itself that the name could no longer be used. And some current members on the current council are Iran, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, China, who swallowed Tibet 30 or 40 years ago, Cuba, we know about, Iraq, where the Yazidis are persecuted, Russia, Turkey. Gaddafi's Libya was a prominent member sort of 10 years ago. So it's a perfect organization for somebody who's an anti-Semite to belong to. Under George W. Bush, the United States ignored the Council, but now, of course, under President Obama, the U.S. is taking a leading role. For some good information on the Human Rights Council, you should go online to UN Media Watch, or UN Watch, sorry.
I mean, beheadings are still happening in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
I wonder if in a year from now, whether our liberal government, behind the scenes, of course, will begin to question why did we ever do that. I think personally, this whole funding of the UN as
You're talking the $15 million.
I am, yeah.
Yes.
I think it was a reaction on the liberal government to say we're back on the world scene and we're going to do a whole bunch of things to convince you that we are, and this is just one of them, without really thinking it through or maybe having the proper understanding of all of the ramifications of that. And I really think that behind the scenes they'll say, boy, that was one we shouldn't have gotten ourselves involved
So we
with.
hope, yes.
So we hope, yes.
So we hope, yeah.
Now, you worked on the UN.
Well, I was with
some
the UN
years.
for 15 years, but not in any political role in terms of providing international aid and management and that sort of thing. But I must say, from what I saw then, the current state of the UN human rights industry doesn't surprise me in the least.
Now, I promised to mention some of the other awful statements that Links has made in the past. For one thing, he stated at a conference that the solution dates back to 1948 when Israel was founded, and he referred to the beginning of Israel's ethnic cleansing. I mean, how on earth did he arrive at that? I'd like to know. He also reportedly blamed 9/11, the attacks on Western nations. So this is a kind of a guy that we're dealing with here, and it's one thing to condemn him, but it's another thing to start even paying into. You see, we can't blame the federal government for that appointment because there's no relationship between his appointment and the federal government. We know that. But at the same time, do we need to be really pouring money into the United Nations, particularly with what they're doing? And I think this is something that we need to be dealing with. Another thing about the UN. What about its record when it comes to Israel? What about Durban 1, which is intended to investigate real racism globally? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I really like what Mark Stain has to say about some of these issues. One of the things that, one of the terms that he's coined is the term preemptive submission, which I think sums it up very nicely. I think that we are in a process of, because we've denied our own identity as a Western civilization as being valuable in the world, we are now adopting the values of other, with a multicultural approach. We're adopting the values and the approaches to life of people that really are very problematic, who hate Jews. And Michael Link is associating himself with them. And I believe that this is a terrible appointment. And I don't know how Canada is going to escape from this dilemma that it's in at this point.
I mean, racism does matter. We look at it internationally, and this is something that often does not get discussed in our culture, that black slaves are still being held by Muslims in Mauritania. The racism, look what happened in Darfur, where 400,000 black Christians were murdered and close to 2 million displaced. These are the things that are going on, and one group against the other. And it's not just with one race, it's global. Racism is a global issue, yet with Durban, that was supposed to investigate racism globally, it ended up being an Israel hate fest. And I think when you look at the kinds of people on the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council, and the history of the United Nations in Israel, it's something that we need. I don't know why we accept these things as nations, as Western nations. That baffles me. Any final words on before we close?
There has to be much more at play behind the scenes than what is visible as we look at it in just the events of today. And so you're absolutely right. To think we can actually make sense of why we do the things we do and put up with what we do, there has to be much more going on that we're not aware of. So.
Yes. Any other closing remarks?
Yeah, I think that the way that the UN has gone in the past, if it continues in that direction, I think that I find that very problematic. I think that the UN is anti-Semitic. Every day you see resolutions condemning Israel when there are all kinds of human rights violations going on all over the world, and yet the focus and the target is always Israel, and I think that's completely wrong, an expression of Jew hatred.
And by pouring another $15 million into the UN, what are we doing? We're just currying favor with a whole bunch of states who are non-democratic, Israel bashers, and so on. And really discredits us in the eyes
It's
of
troubling
right-thinking
because
people.
it's an endorsement of human rights crimes.
Yes.
It's an endorsement. Thank you all so much for joining me.
Up next, a trip to Magdala to see the first century road and marketplace.
So now we're standing in the first century road where Jesus would have walked through here, maybe washed his hands in that bin that's down the road here in the basin. And then on my back here, what you're looking at is the marketplace of the first century where they would have sold fish, bread, wine, meat. And we know from the historian Flavius Josephus that the fish from the Sea of Galilee was brought up here, conserved in salt. It was sent back out through the Via Maris all the way to Caesarea Maritima, and then from there arrived to Rome. So we know from the writings that this was an important marketplace for the fish that was sold here, and a place of encounter with Jesus as he walked through here also.
We conclude our program today with some sights and sounds within Israel. Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to visit our website at www.icejcanada.tv or call us at 1-866-324-9133. 100% of what we receive from you toward a project goes to that designation. Through your contribution to ICEJ Canada, you can participate by giving to Haifa Home for Holocaust Survivors, Women at Risk, Red Carpet Project, Operation Life Shield, Bomb-Proof Shelters, Shoulder to Shoulder, Alias Support, Bet Singer Children's Home, Israel in Crisis, ICEJ Communication Media Fund, Christian Friends of Yad Vashem, Magen David Adam Emergency Services, Canada Israel Young Adult Scholarship, Equip and Teach, Bet Rachel Strauss Inclusive Community, Gift Estate and Securities Funds.